Good morning, Doctor. How are you doing today?
Well, I'm well. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. I think your book title says it all. Distorting Democracy, The Forgotten History of the Electoral College, and Why It Matters Today, because I think people have shoved this to the side thinking, I don't know. But now that they've got this book, they can say, I know a lot more.
Well, that was what I was trying to do, was to set it out as plainly as I could, because it can be technical. The topic is technical.
Yeah.
But I wanted to write something that ordinary people could easily understand, and also to sort of bring to life the people who created this thing and who have massaged it to their benefit over the centuries.
Well, the number one thing here that really caught my attention, and I because this is the way that I was taught as a martial artist, learn the history before you learn the next break. And that is that you put focus on the history of what this is all about and how it did begin.
Well, you're talking my language. History is everything about who we are, why we have what we have, why we are where we are. And so absolutely, we really can't understand this system if we don't understand how we got it.
Don't you think that's because in school, I don't remember anybody in the government class breaking down the Electoral College like you do. And the thing is that, I mean, they talk about the presidency, they talk about local government, but they don't talk about the Electoral College.
Well, what they do very often, I think Americans do this, and I'm not really suggesting that there's a deep flaw here, but just take it for granted. When something is 237 years old, as our Constitution was as of yesterday, that was the anniversary of the signing. You take those institutions as almost as if they're timeless, but they're not. They come into being at a discrete historical moment as a product of certain circumstances, and when we understand that, we also can free ourselves from misconceptions and from systems that aren't really serving us very well, in fact, are harming us.
One of the things that I keep bumping into, especially with the younger voters, and I got to figure out the language to speak to them. They're saying the Electoral College is going to make the decision anyway. And I say, you've got to understand the system of this country.
Mm-hmm. Well, so what I would say is they're both right and wrong.
Wow.
And they're both right and wrong, because let's think about it. It always takes the same number of electors to win the Electoral College, 270 or more.
Yep.
That does not change. It doesn't change if 300 million people vote. It doesn't change if only 50 people vote. If one person votes in every state, that state still gets the same number of electors. And of course, that's one problem with it, is that it doesn't reward candidates who can increase turnout in certain states.
Yeah.
So it's got perverse incentives actually built into it.
How is the Electoral College changing? Because there's so many people moving in from the north as well as California. That's got to change the way that the college actually puts itself in front of the people.
Well, that's right. I mean, and of course, the United States has always been a place where we've migrated and moved around a lot. But so whether a state is red or blue, first of all, that's just a false description of any state. States are not red and blue. And I wish we would quit talking about it that way, because what that does is to just forget that there is a healthy political minority in every state. And these minorities can be quite sizable. So, for example, we're used to thinking of California as blue.
Yeah.
But in fact, 6 million Californians voted for Donald Trump in 2020, but they got no representation in the Electoral College. That's 6 million Americans who showed up with no political power at the ballot box. Now, they cast their vote, but they couldn't help their candidate. And by contrast, and again, this is not about rewarding a specific candidate, but I'm just trying to illustrate the distortions of the Electoral College. By contrast, in 5 small states, 1.7 million Biden voters got 17 Electoral College votes. So think about this: 6 million Californians with no representation, 1.7 million people from small states that get 17 electors. And another way of thinking about that is that any Californian who votes, if their candidate wins that state, they influence 20% of the electoral vote.
Wow. Wow. See, this is the reason why your book is so important, because you do break it down to a better understanding and how we can learn to activate what it is that we need to do on a local level as well as a national level.
Yes. Well, we need. So I want to then say what you said about, you encourage people to go vote. And I will just say, I vote every time, and I've never voted for the winning candidate in my state. But I vote. I have 3 adult children. You better believe I'm on the phone. Are you registered? Voting is really, really important. The habit of voting is really, really important. As a woman, I appreciate that my grandmother couldn't vote until she was well into her adulthood. And so it's just an important habit for an American to be engaged in. And it helps you be invested in your own future. But I think we need to do it with the awareness that there is a real problem and that we are showing up at the ballot box profoundly unequal right now.
Yep. Would you say the founding fathers were as wise as history says they were?
Oh, I love that question. So, I don't want to. I would say the founding fathers were a varied group of human beings. And who are we talking about here? Well, with the framing of the Constitution, we're talking about 55 men. So, if you have 55 people who show up, they're going to be of a range of wisdom and abilities, and they don't all come with the same level of preparation, and they don't all come with the same ideas, even though we talk about them as if they, have exactly the same thoughts, but they disagreed about a lot. I'll just say for some color, you have people who, some of those men slept with everything that didn't move. Yeah. Some of them, there were alcoholics. There were people, some of them died in debtor's prison. 2 of them died in duels. So, they're just very, very human in the same ways that we are today. But when they created the Electoral College, they were not trying to fulfill some important political ideal or some Enlightenment principle, some notion, some important revolutionary principle. They were simply trying to find a way to get a wise person in office. And they didn't believe that ordinary people had adequate information. Now, that's different from thinking ordinary people are fools. They don't think ordinary people are fools. In fact, there are a number of the framers of the Constitution who give quite stirring speeches about how we can trust people to make the right choice. Yeah. But there simply weren't enough of them to carry the day at that moment. But I want listeners to think about an America in 1787 that was largely rural, where communications was in an embryonic stage. There were probably about 100 newspapers, and they were mostly regional in their focus. And so you had very few people who had truly national reputations. Most Americans knew George Washington. They probably knew Ben Franklin, but beyond that, they don't know who James Madison is. Right. You might have known him if you were a Virginian, but maybe then only if you lived in that part of Virginia. So, when George Mason says the people are no better than a blind man choosing colors, when he says that, what he means is they just don't have the information, not that they're stupid. And, so that was the real misgiving there about popular election. But a lot of times people who talk about the origins of the Electoral College, they leave out, that James Madison says twice that he thought the people were the best choice, that Gouverneur Morris, who wrote the language, the finished draft of the Constitution, over and over tries to persuade the convention to just put it to a popular vote. So it's more complicated in its origins than people think, but it's also just not a highly principled device. And I think we need to quit talking about it as if it is.
I always wonder what the ancestors would say about what we've gone through in 24 years.
Well, so you might be right. I want to say that where we are now is, it's very troubling, and I'm going to say I'm worried. But I want to also point out that the framers were also very, very worried. You should, if I had time to take people through some of these conversations, they were worried that the country was going to fragment into three republics. There was an intense political strife. And then even after the Constitution was implemented and went into effect, the next 10, 15, 20 years were periods of deep, deep partisanship where it was really, really very, very ugly. And then we've had these kinds of moments before. Of course, we did have a civil war. But we've also enjoyed times of less polarization as well. We're just in a uniquely bad one right now because I think there is a level of hateful discourse that's been normalized. And we're also, there's a lot of public lying that people are not really questioning. And, one of the things I wanted to do in writing this book was to sort of demonstrate what sound history is all about, because there are people out there who are not even telling the truth about our history when they talk about the Electoral College, not relying on sources and really kind of pulling things out of thin air, putting words in the framer's mouth. And I think that's equally as dangerous and also a crime against history.
Mm-hmm. I wish I could have been a fly on the wall when you wrote these words inside that computer. And to this moment, it sends chills. Danger lurks in American presidential elections. My God, I stopped reading and had to really put myself in a position of thought when I read that.
Well, yes. And so, that's another way that we ignore the problems with the Electoral College because it is an incentive for fraud. Now, think about this. When you have 155 million votes nationwide, that's how many people voted in 2020. If you were going off a strict popular vote, it's very hard to commit fraud at the level that would alter that. It's impossible. But if you only need to change a few electors in a few states or even one state, which absolutely you can do, you can change the entire election by shifting the election in one single state and even sometimes in a single district. That is an incentive for fraud. And 2020 was not the first time that we've had similar fraud with respect to elector slates. So, one that we could look at is 1876. I would argue that we have a few elections that we don't know for sure who was the rightful winner. Right. So we've got an incentive to fraud built into our system, and that's dangerous.
One of the things that you put a lot of focus on, and I'm so proud of you for doing this, you literally say that you were going to dig up things beyond quotes, that this wasn't going to be just a book of quotes, that you were going to really, give us something that we could hold on to.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, so there are people out there, that put quotes by the founding fathers up on Twitter. Well, they say things that contradict themselves. And one quote is not the full story of their thought. And if I can give a great example, there's one historian who's always talking about how Alexander Hamilton called the Electoral College excellent. Well, yes, he did. But, one of the reasons that he praised it when it was created, he said that the electors can't be tampered with, so their vote can't be influenced. But Alexander Hamilton himself, within a year of writing those words, is tampering with electors. And he became the country's first election meddler. And he meddled in every presidential election until Aaron Burr shot him in 1804. And so, it's not like I'm not trying to paint him as uniquely bad. I think he's, like any human being, an amalgam of good and bad. But he was a politician, and he wanted to maximize the political benefit for his party and for his candidates. And so, if you just quote Alexander Hamilton thought the Electoral College was excellent, well, that's just not the full story.
Right. Well, and I'll tell you, you do have a quote here that really kind of blew me away, and I didn't even know it existed until I got my hands on your book. Thomas Jefferson, the earth always belongs to the living generation. What?
I love that because, Jefferson is saying, and actually, again, that's a beautiful quote that comes out of a letter with some that readers should read the whole passage. It's from an 1816 letter to Samuel Kercheval in Virginia. And what he says there is that the Constitution is not sacred like the Ark of the Covenant. It's a human creation, and that we should not have that view that it's beyond amendment. And that each generation, another part of that, that should not weakly believe that they are not as capable as their forebears as choosing the form of the best way to govern themselves. I trust you. I trust you, the inheritors of this system.
So what did you personally learn from doing this project? And it's not something that it's coming to an end, because your nose has got to be in books and in studying at all times.
Yes, I mean, I love what I do. And as I tell my students, my job is to hang out with people from the past. And, what a privilege. What did I learn? Gosh, so much. I think, so I've been a historian for 25, 30 years. And I think, I've always had an appreciation of sort of understand that we can't take people out of the context of their time, and that people are human beings that we can't pronounce as all good or as all bad. And I think that just that was really kind of driven home to me in a new way. I think I've always admired James Madison.
Yeah.
But I also, there's a moment in here where he does something to help the fortunes of his own political party that, I think it was borderline, borderline unethical. And I don't think he even at that moment believed in what he was doing. So I would just say that each of us is capable of a wide range of behaviors. And we need political systems that bring out the best in us, because, the ugly is kind of there in all of us. And we don't want systems that encourage that. And, so I think that's kind of, to take a moral lesson. But then I think the other lesson is that truth is always real complicated. And people want simple, they want tweets. They want 144 characters. And if you can boil it down to 144 characters, it's probably not true.
You've got to come back to this show anytime in the future. The door is always going to be open for you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Well, you be brilliant today, okay?
Thank you, Aro. Am I saying your name right?
You
Aro?
said it right. Yep, absolutely.
Okay.